All right, guys, here is a tutorial for you for solving equations. There are lots of things to remember about solving equations, and the primary one is to remember the steps. You always start by looking for the big, ugly fraction. If you don't have that, you look to see if you have distributive property. If you don't have that, you look to see if you have like terms on either side of the equation. If you don't have that, you look to see if you have an extra variable that you can zero pair. If not, you look for your extra constant that you can zero pair. If you're at the end of the equation, you divide by your coefficient, and if your answer is a fraction, you simplify as necessary. So these are all the things that we're going to be doing. So let's start with the big ugly fraction. As you may recall, a big ugly fraction is when you have math in the numerator and then a single denominator with a number on the other side. So remember that the goal for the big ugly fraction is to get rid of the denominator. If the denominator was not there, we would just have a regular equation we know how to solve. So in order to do this, we put big giant parentheses and we multiply both sides on purpose by that denominator. Because the denominator will cancel out, we'll be left with our numerator. On the other side, you must remember to multiply. This is probably the place where students make the most errors, is they forget to multiply and they would just bring down 10, for example. So we have to be careful there. At this point, we just have a regular equation. We're at this step now. Zero pair our extra constant. Then we were going to divide by our coefficient. And we have our answer. Okay. Now the thing to remember also about the big ugly fraction is what if you have an extra number? Like, let's put back this equation the way that it was, but let's say I have an extra number like that. So in this case, before I can touch the 3, I have to zero pair this extra constant out. You can only multiply by the denominator to get rid of the big ugly fraction if it's the only thing on its side of the equation. So in this case, I'm going to have to get rid of that 4. Now I can multiply by 3. 2x plus 2 equals 18. Right here, don't forget to multiply. And then I can subtract 2 and divide by 2. Okay, so we have to watch out for a situation like this and make sure we take care of that first before we touch our big ugly fraction. Okay, now let's move on to what if you have the distributive property. So remember that distributive property, you'll always see parentheses, and you will either see a number in front right up against the parentheses like that, or you may just see a minus sign in front of the parentheses, in which case that really indicates a -1. Okay, so let's talk about the things we need to watch out for when you're multiplying. You multiply the outside number times both terms on the inside. Sometimes students multiply the first number and they just bring down the second one without thinking about it. But remember, you have to actually multiply here too, so don't fall into that trap. The second thing to watch out for is what if that number in the front of the parentheses is negative. You got to be careful. A negative times a positive is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. So you can't just copy the sign. Sometimes the sign changes depending on what's up here. So be careful with that. Especially if you have a minus sign like this and a negative number in front. You have to be careful here, because now this negative is going to turn into a positive, because a negative times a negative is a positive. You have to watch out for that. You also have to be careful for if you have just parentheses with a negative sign in the front, which is what we were just talking about, like this. This really means the opposite of everything in here. So what you're doing is you're really multiplying by -1. This is really a -1 like this. So if it helps you, draw the 1 in like that, and then you can go ahead and do your multiplying. For combining like terms, This is when you're going to see multiple variables or multiple constants on the same side of the equation. So for example, 2x plus 4x plus 5 equals 9. Before you go zero pairing the 5, you should notice that you have two variable terms here. And so you should add those together. Then you can zero pair, all right? Don't do any, notice that combining like terms is before any zero pairing. So you should always look for that and do that first. Sometimes you may have like terms on both sides of the equation. Like this. On the left side, I have variable like terms. On the right side, I have constant like terms. So always make sure that you put the circle or box around the sign that's in front of the number also, because that tells you what math to do. This is 2x minus 4x. So you know what to type into Desmos in order to get your answer. On the other side, you would have this, okay? So be careful when you're combining like terms. If you make a sign error here, it will make the whole rest of your problem wrong, even if you're doing all the steps correctly. While we're here in this spot, let's go ahead and talk about our extra variable. A lot of students at this point get tempted to zero pair the 6 or zero pair the 2, but you don't want to do that first, because what you want to do is notice that you have two variables, one on the left and one on the right. And in that case, you need to zero pair that first. There is a reason that zero pairing the extra variable comes before zero pairing the extra constant. You really, really, really need to do this first. This is going to become important in algebra next year. So we want to make sure you're in the habit right now. So I always like to zero pair the smaller variable. -2 is smaller than 10. So I would zero pair that. This turns into 12x. And then we can go to our extra constant, which is right here, okay? You really have to be careful that you take care of that extra variable first. I think that's pretty much all of the steps. Let's talk about what happens when you have fractions in your problem. So let's say we have 1/2 x plus 3/2 equals 10. So if you look at your denominators and they're both the same number, you're going to make giant parentheses and you're going to create your own distributive property with whatever the number that denominator is. And you can just type into Desmos and let Desmos do this. 2 times 1/2. And let's pull up Desmos and I'll show you. 2 times 1/2. All right. And Desmos shows you that the answer is 1. So for this one, you would put 1x. And then 2 times 3/2. Go back to Desmos. 3/2. And you see Desmos tells you the answer is 3. So 2 times 3/2 is just 3. And then 10 times 2 is 20. Once you have taken care of your fraction, then you can solve the problem like normal now. We would subtract 3 on both sides and we get 1x equals 17. What happens if your fractions don't have the same denominator? So let's say we have 1/2 x plus 2/3 equals, I don't know, 12. Okay. If you have two denominators that are different, what you do is multiply those two numbers. 2 times 3 equals 6. So 6 is the number that we're going to use. Okay. I saw on the homeworks that some people turned in as they were adding the numbers, they were saying, okay, 2 plus 3 equals 5, and then they were using 5. That is not the way to do this. You multiply those two denominators and use the number that you get. So then you would go again into Desmos, although for half, you could just say to yourself, okay, what's half of 6? Half of 6 is 3, so that's 3x. But 6 times 2/3, you may not know that one. So we'll go back to Desmos, and we say 6 times 2/3. The answer is 4. And then don't forget to multiply this side. 12 times 6, 72. Then at this point, you can zero pair and continue on like normal. Okay. Let's see, what happens if you have distributive property and a fraction? Let's say you have 3 times 3/4 x plus 9 equals 10. You must do your distributive property first, okay? 3 times 3/4. Now, in a situation like 3 times 3/4, you're going to find that it's not a whole number. It turns out to be 9/4. Basically, what we've done is we have multiplied 3 times the numerator, which is 3 times 3 right here. 3 times 3, that gives you 9. 3 times 9 is 27. Now at this point, I can say, okay, I'm going to get rid of my denominator, and I'm going to multiply everything times 4. Okay. If you have a fraction inside a fraction, like 2/3 x plus 3 over 9 equals 2, like this, the big ugly fraction, go ahead and get rid of the big ugly fraction denominator first, like this. Then get rid of your fraction, all right? 2x plus 9 equals 54, and then continue on with your life. Okay, I think that pretty much covers all of the things that you might run into when you're solving equations. So hang on to this tutorial in case you get stuck on a problem, and I hope that helps you with your practice.